She boarded the plane like anyone else, calm, quiet, just hoping for a peaceful flight. But within minutes, the air grew thick with whispers, side eyes, and a voice that cut through the cabin. He doesn't belong here. A stranger's confidence turned cruel, and what began as an ordinary trip spiraled into something far darker. Cameras started recording. Passengers froze. No one knew the truth about the man in seat 3 amperes until it was too late to take back their judgment. What happens when prejudice collides with power at 30,000 feet? Marcus Reed was used to blending in. A quiet man with a sharp mind, he spent years working behind the scenes, an investigator for the FBI, specializing in counterintelligence. But to anyone watching, he was just another traveler heading home. On this sunny afternoon, Marcus was finally taking a long overdue break. A first-class ticket, a reward for months of grueling undercover work. He packed light, wore a simple gray suit, and smiled when the gate agent wished him a good flight. As he settled into his seat, the world outside the window seemed calm, almost peaceful. He didn't notice the woman 2 rows away watching him, her eyes narrowing as if his presence alone were an intrusion. Marcus had no idea that this short flight would become a battlefield, not of weapons, but of judgment, the kind that doesn't ask questions before deciding who belongs and who doesn't. While most passengers scrolled through their phones, Marcus adjusted his badge, tucked deep in his briefcase, hidden from sight. He wasn't on duty today, but in just a few minutes, he'd be forced to choose between staying silent and standing up for something far greater than himself. Because prejudice was about to board that flight and it had no idea who it was sitting next to. The plane hadn't even left the gate when it began. Marcus was scrolling through his phone, half listening to the hum of passengers settling in, when he heard her voice sharp, clipped, and loud enough to draw eyes. "Excuse me, there must be some mistake. He's not supposed to be sitting here." For a second, Marcus didn't realize she was talking about him. He looked up, confused, as the flight attendant leaned over with a polite smile that quickly faltered. The woman, a neatly dressed passenger in her 40s, was pointing straight at him, her voice rising. "I paid for first class," she said, her tone dripping with entitlement. "You people usually sit in the back." The cabin went silent. Phones lowered. Conversations froze. Marcus felt the familiar sting of humiliation creeping up his neck. It wasn't new he'd seen this kind of ignorance before, but not like this. Not so public. Not so brazen. The flight attendant's lips tightened. "Ma'am, he's in the correct seat." But the woman wasn't finished. She leaned closer, whispering to the attendant, but her words carried anyway. "Are you sure? He doesn't look like someone who can afford this." Marcus could feel every eye on him now. The air grew heavier, the space smaller. He tried to stay calm, reminding himself, not today, just breathe. But the humiliation was impossible to ignore. Then came the moment that shifted everything. The woman pressed the call button again, demanding to speak to the pilot. "This isn't safe," she declared. "I don't feel comfortable sitting next to him." Marcus's hands tightened around his phone. He could see people recording now, faces half hidden behind their screens, documenting someone else's pain for entertainment. When the flight attendant returned with the captain in tow, the woman crossed her arms, satisfied. "See? I told you. Just look at him." The captain's eyes met Marcus's. Calm, assessing, professional. "Sir," he said quietly, "is everything all right?" Marcus took a slow breath. "I'm fine," he replied. "Just trying to get to DC." Before the captain could speak again, the woman snapped, "You need to check his ticket. I don't think he belongs in first class." It was the kind of statement that had started countless confrontations. Simple, dismissive, poisoned with bias. But this time, it wasn't just ignorance. It was escalation. The captain turned to her. "Ma'am, I assure you Mr. Reed has every right to be here." The emphasis on his name caught her off guard. Marcus could see the faint confusion in her eyes. She didn't know who he was, not yet. The plane finally began to taxi, but the tension didn't fade. Marcus stared out the window, jaw tight, replaying the moment in his head. Years of training told him to stay silent, but every fiber of his being burned with anger. And then, as the wheels lifted off the ground, she said it again, low, venomous, and meant to wound. "People like you always think the rules don't apply." Marcus turned slowly, his voice steady but cold. You have no idea what rules I enforce. The cameras caught that. The internet would soon catch the rest. The seatbelt light blinked off. The flight had leveled, but the tension had not. The woman's complaints grew louder, sharper, each word slicing through the cabin like broken glass. I want him moved. Now, she demanded, pointing again, her voice trembling with outrage. This is ridiculous! I'm not sitting next to a… The word hung in the air, unfinished but understood. A collective gasp rippled through the passengers. Marcus felt something inside him shift. He had spent his entire career staying calm in chaos, training to read people, to de-escalate. But this wasn't an operation. This was a moment that stripped away the badge, the suit, the calm exterior, and left only a man who was tired of being silent. He stood up, slowly, controlled. The woman's face twisted in alarm. See? He's threatening me! Someone stop him! But Marcus didn't say a word. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small leather wallet, worn, creased, unmistakable. He flipped it open, revealing the gold badge inside. The cabin fell silent. The woman's eyes widened as the letters came into focus. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Marcus met her stare, his voice steady. You wanted to know if I belong here? He paused. I do. I've spent my life protecting people like you, even when you saw me as less than human. No one moved. The flight attendants froze, unsure whether to speak or simply let the moment breathe. Marcus closed the badge, returned it to his case, and sat down without another word. But the silence that followed wasn't peace, it was shame, heavy and unrelenting. The woman's expression crumbled. For the first time, she looked small, uncertain. Around her, passengers exchanged uneasy glances. Some whispered, others filmed. In 30,000 feet of sky, the power had shifted not through anger, but truth. And as Marcus stared out the window, one thought burned in his mind. Sometimes justice doesn't need a courtroom. It just needs to be seen. When the plane landed, no one rushed to stand. The usual shuffle of bags and chatter was replaced by an uneasy silence. The woman avoided Marcus's eyes. Her earlier confidence dissolved into shame. The same passengers who once stared in quiet complicity now looked away, each one carrying the weight of what they'd just witnessed. As Marcus stepped off the plane, a young flight attendant caught his arm. Her voice trembled as she whispered, I'm so sorry. You shouldn't have had to go through that. He gave a small, tired smile. That's the thing, he said softly. It's not the first time. And it won't be the last. Outside, the world moved on. Flights, boarding, announcements echoing, people living their lives untouched by what had just happened 30,000 feet above them. But for Marcus, the moment lingered, not because of the humiliation, but because of what it revealed. He thought about all the times men and women who looked like him didn't have the badge, the title, or the platform to prove their worth. All the times their stories ended differently, without justice, without acknowledgement, without a camera to capture the truth. That flight was just one scene in a much larger story. A story about how quickly judgment replaces understanding. About how racism doesn't always shout. It whispers, it assumes, it hides behind concern and comfort. Marcus knew his silence that day would have been easier, but silence never changes anything. So he spoke up. He filed a report, not for himself, but for the next person who wouldn't have a badge to protect them. Because until society learns to see beyond skin, to recognize humanity before hierarchy, these stories will keep repeating. And maybe the real question isn't how long it'll take to change, but how many more moments like this we're willing to watch before we do.